The morning of April 23, 1943. North Atlantic, 47 degrees north latitude, 32 degrees west longitude. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Zimmermann peered through the periscope of U-175, watching the scattered merchant ships of convoy HX-233 lumber eastward through the grey swells. His submarine had been stalking this convoy for 18 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What caught Zimmermann's attention wasn't the fat Liberty ships loaded with American war materials. It was the warship closing on his position at 28 knots. The vessel was small, ungainly, with a single funnel and minimal armament. Through his Zeiss optics, Zimmermann could make out the hull number DE-102, a destroyer escort, one of the new American mass-produced escorts that U-boat commanders had been hearing about for months. Zimmermann allowed himself a thin smile. These ships, hastily built in American shipyards using simplified designs and commercial construction techniques, represented everything wrong with American naval thinking. Too small to carry effective anti-submarine weapons, too slow to catch a surfaced U-boat, too lightly built to survive a torpedo hit. German naval intelligence had dismissed them as cheap toys, desperate American attempts to build quantity over quality. What Zimmermann couldn't know as he prepared to torpedo the convoy was that USS Moberly, the destroyer escort bearing down on his position, carried weapons and detection equipment that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare. Within 30 minutes, U-175 would become the first German submarine sunk by an American destroyer escort. Her destruction would mark the beginning of the end for the Wolfpack tactics that had brought Britain to the brink of starvation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how 560 destroyer escorts transformed from laughingstock to submarine killer begins with a crisis that nearly lost the war before America fully entered it. By spring 1943, German U-boats had achieved what their surface fleet could never accomplish. They had brought the Royal Navy to its knees through sheer attrition. Admiral Karl Dönitz's submarines had sunk over 3 million tons of Allied shipping in the first quarter of 1943 alone. The mathematics were brutally simple. German U-boats were destroying merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. Britain's food imports had dropped to 3 months' supply. Fuel oil reserves were critically low. Without the convoys carrying American Lend-Lease materials across the Atlantic, Britain would collapse within months, regardless of how courageously the Royal Air Force had fought during the Battle of Britain or how successfully the British Army was performing in North Africa. The crisis had reached its peak in March 1943 during the convoy battles around HX-229 and SC-122. In just 4 days, German Wolfpacks had destroyed 22 merchant ships, totaling over 140,000 tons. British Admiralty reports concluded that Germany had never come closer to severing the Atlantic lifeline. Admiral Dönitz commanded over 100 submarines prowling the shipping lanes, organized into Wolfpacks of unprecedented size and coordination. The fundamental problem wasn't the quality of Royal Navy destroyers or the courage of their crews. British destroyers were among the finest warships in the world, fast, well-armed, and commanded by officers with years of combat experience. But there simply weren't enough of them. Each convoy required at least 6 escorts for adequate protection against submarine attack. With convoys sailing every few days from multiple ports, the Royal Navy needed hundreds of escort vessels simultaneously at sea. British shipyards, already straining to replace battle damage and build new capital ships, couldn't produce escorts fast enough. Each destroyer required 18 months to build using traditional methods. Skilled shipwrights were in short supply. Steel was allocated first to aircraft production and tank manufacturing. The Royal Navy was fighting a war of attrition. It was mathematically certain to lose. President Franklin Roosevelt grasped the strategic situation with remarkable clarity. In a memo to Navy Secretary Frank Knox dated January 15, 1942, Roosevelt wrote that the Battle of the Atlantic would be won or lost based on escort availability, not on the quality of individual ships. What was needed was adequate vessels in overwhelming numbers, not perfect vessels in limited quantities. Emerged from an unlikely source. The Maritime Commission's emergency shipbuilding program. Henry Kaiser, an industrialist with no shipbuilding experience before the war, had revolutionized cargo ship production by applying mass production techniques from automobile manufacturing. Kaiser's Liberty ships were being completed in record time, using welding instead of riveting, prefabricated sections instead of custom construction, and assembly line techniques instead of traditional shipwright craftsmanship. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, initially opposed applying these methods to warship construction. Navy doctrine emphasized quality over quantity. Each destroyer was considered a precision instrument, requiring years of careful construction by skilled craftsmen. The idea of mass-producing escort vessels using simplified designs and commercial techniques violated everything the Navy believed about proper warship construction. Roosevelt overruled the admirals on March 20, 1942, ordering an emergency program to design and build what would become destroyer escorts. The specifications were brutally pragmatic. These ships would be fast enough to keep up with merchant convoys, but not fast enough to operate with fleet destroyers. They would carry sufficient anti-submarine weapons to be effective, but not the heavy guns needed for surface combat. They would be simple enough for inexperienced shipyards to build quickly, but not sophisticated enough to impress naval architects. The design that emerged from the Bureau of Ships represented a revolution in naval construction philosophy. Destroyer escorts would displace only 1,400 tons compared to 2,100 tons for fleet destroyers. They would make 21 knots compared to 35 knots for destroyers. They would mount 3 3-inch guns compared to 5 5-inch guns on destroyers. Everything about them was smaller, slower, and cheaper. Navy. Traditionalists called them tin cans and predicted they would be death traps in combat. Admiral William Halsey reportedly said that sending destroyer escorts against German U-boats was like sending boys to do men's work. The criticism wasn't entirely unfair. These ships looked ungainly compared to the sleek lines of fleet destroyers. Their single funnel and boxy superstructure gave them the appearance of armed merchant vessels rather than proper warships. But the destroyer escort design incorporated innovations that would prove revolutionary in anti-submarine warfare. Unlike fleet destroyers optimized for high-speed surface combat, destroyer escorts were designed specifically for hunting submarines. Their slower speed actually improved their sonar performance. High-speed operation created too much water noise for effective submarine detection. Their smaller size made them more maneuverable in the tight turns required for depth charge attacks. Most importantly, destroyer escorts carried weapons systems that transformed submarine hunting from guesswork into science. The latest sonar equipment could detect submerged submarines at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The new Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar could fire 24 projectiles in a circular pattern ahead of the ship, attacking submarines before they could escape. Unlike depth charges, which had to pass over a submarine before exploding, Hedgehog projectiles detonated only on direct contact with the target. The first destroyer escort, USS Evarts, was commissioned on April 15, 1943. Built by the Boston Navy Yard in just 8 months, she represented everything critics feared about mass-produced warships. Her hull was welded rather than riveted, saving construction time but creating concerns about structural integrity. Her machinery was simplified, using commercial marine engines rather than custom naval power plants. Her crew accommodations were Spartan compared to fleet destroyers. Yet USS Evarts passed her sea trials with flying colours. Her sonar performed flawlessly, her guns fired accurately, her depth charge racks functioned smoothly. Most importantly, she could maintain 21 knots in heavy seas, while her sonar operators tracked submarine contacts. The critics had been proven wrong about her seaworthiness, but her combat effectiveness remained to be demonstrated. That test came on April 23, 1943, when USS Moberly encountered U-175 while escorting convoy HX-233. Lieutenant Commander George Loza commanded Moberly with a crew of 200 men, most of whom had never been to sea before the war. His sonar operator was a former radio repairman from Detroit who had learned submarine detection through 6 weeks of intensive training. His gunnery officer was a recent Naval Academy graduate on his first sea assignment. At 1400 hours, Moberly's sonar detected a submerged contact at range 1800 yards. The echo was clear and strong, indicating a large, submerged object moving slowly underwater. Loza ordered battle stations and increased speed to 25 knots, approaching the contact for a hedgehog attack. This was the moment that would determine whether destroyer escorts were effective weapons or expensive failures. U-175 was attempting to approach convoy HX-233 submerged when Zimmerman heard the distinctive high-pitched ping of active sonar. American escorts were searching for his submarine using sound waves, but Zimmerman wasn't particularly concerned. German U-boats had been evading British sonar for years through careful maneuvering and silent running. He ordered his crew to reduce speed and maintain silent running procedures. What Zimmerman didn't understand was that American sonar had evolved far beyond British equipment. The QHB sonar aboard Moberly used higher frequencies that provided more precise target resolution. The operator could determine not just the submarine's position, but its course and speed. Unlike earlier sonar systems that lost contact when ships passed directly overhead, the QHB maintained tracking throughout the attack run. At range 400 yards, Loza ordered hedgehog attack. 24 projectiles arced through the air in a precise circular pattern, each carrying a 35-pound warhead designed to penetrate submarine hulls. Unlike depth charges that relied on water pressure for destruction, hedgehog projectiles were contact-fused. They would explode only if they struck the submarine directly. Zimmerman felt U-175 shudder as 2 hedgehog projectiles punched through her pressure hull and exploded inside the forward compartments. The detonations ruptured high-pressure air lines and flooded the torpedo room. Emergency lighting failed as electrical systems short-circuited. The submarine's angle increased sharply as water poured through the breached hull. Within 3 minutes, U-175 was out of control, rising toward the surface as compressed air escaped from damaged tanks. Zimmerman ordered emergency surface procedures, knowing his submarine could no longer remain submerged. Better to fight on the surface than drown in a damaged boat at 200 feet depth. U-175 broke surface 400 yards from USS Moberly at 14:25 hours. Loza immediately ordered his gun crews to open fire with all weapons. The 3-inch main battery and twin 40mm guns poured shells into the submarine's conning tower and deck area. German crew members attempting to man their deck gun were cut down by machine gun fire. The engagement lasted 7 minutes. U-175 took over 40 hits from Moberly's guns before Zimmerman ordered abandon ship. 54 German crew members entered the water as their submarine settled stern first into 2,000 feet of Atlantic Ocean. Moberly rescued 19 survivors, including Zimmerman himself. 35 German submariners went down with U-175, marking the first U-boat sunk by an American destroyer escort. The significance of this engagement extended far beyond a single submarine kill. USS Moberly had demonstrated that mass-produced escort vessels could locate, attack, and destroy German U-boats using standardized tactics and equipment. The Hedgehog mortar had proven devastatingly effective, achieving a direct hit rate of 8% compared to less than 2% for depth charges. Most importantly, destroyer escorts could be built fast enough to flood the Atlantic with anti-submarine hunters. American shipyards were already accelerating destroyer escort production using Henry Kaiser's revolutionary techniques. Bethlehem Steel's Hingham shipyard had reduced construction time from 8 months to 4 months through modular assembly. Workers built hull sections, superstructure modules, and machinery spaces separately, then welded them together on the building ways. This prefabrication approach allowed multiple teams to work simultaneously rather than sequentially. The Boston Navy Yard employed women welders for the first time in its history, training housewives and secretaries to operate welding equipment. These women, many with no prior industrial experience, produced welds that passed Navy inspection standards. Traditional shipwrights initially resisted female workers, but production demands overcame prejudice. By late 1943, over 30% of destroyer escort construction workers were women. Quality control remained exceptional despite the accelerated pace. Each ship underwent rigorous sea trials testing all systems under combat conditions. Sonar equipment was calibrated to Navy specifications. Guns were test-fired to verify accuracy. Hedgehog mortars were loaded with practice rounds and fired repeatedly to train crews. Ships that failed any test returned to the yard for corrections before commissioning. German naval intelligence struggled to comprehend the scale of American destroyer escort production. By June 1943, American yards were commissioning destroyer escorts faster than Germany could build U-boats. The mathematical equation that had favored submarines was reversing. Each new U-boat would face multiple escort vessels, equipped with advanced detection gear and deadly accurate weapons. Admiral Dönitz received increasingly disturbing reports from his submarine commanders throughout the summer of 1943. U-boats that had previously operated with near impunity were being hunted relentlessly by small American warships that appeared in growing numbers. These vessels, initially dismissed as ineffective, were proving remarkably persistent and deadly in actual combat. U-boat commanders reported that the new American escorts used different tactics than British destroyers. Instead of racing around at high speed making noise that masked their sonar, destroyer escorts maintained moderate speeds that optimized their detection. Equipment. They worked in coordinated groups, with multiple ships triangulating on submarine contacts. When one ship gained sonar contact, others immediately converged to prevent escape. The Hedgehog mortar was particularly feared by German crews. Unlike depth charges that warned submarines of approaching attack through underwater explosions, Hedgehog strikes came without warning. Submarines that thought they'd successfully evaded attack suddenly found their hulls breached by direct hits. The psychological impact was severe. Crew members never knew if they'd survived an attack until several minutes after the weapons had been fired. By August 1943, German U-boat losses exceeded replacement rates for the first time in the war. Dönitz had lost 37 submarines in July alone, including some of his most experienced commanders. Boats that returned from patrol reported constant harassment by American escorts. Surfacing to charge batteries, previously routine, had become deadly dangerous. Running submerged drained batteries faster than they could be recharged, limiting operational range and patrol duration. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The transformation was most visible in the Atlantic convoy battles that had previously favored German submarines. Convoy SC-143, sailing in early October 1943, was protected by 6 destroyer escorts from Escort Division 13. When Wolfpack Rossbach attempted to attack this convoy, they encountered a defensive screen unlike anything they'd faced before. The destroyer escorts operated in a coordinated pattern, with each ship assigned a specific search sector around the convoy. Their sonar created an overlapping detection network that submarines couldn't penetrate without being discovered. When U-645 attempted to approach the convoy submerged, she was detected simultaneously by 3 escorts at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The subsequent attack demonstrated how destroyer escort tactics had evolved beyond simple depth charging. USS Bostwick gained initial sonar contact and immediately broadcast the submarine's position to other escorts. USS Bronstein and USS Baker converged on the contact, while Bostwick maintained tracking. The 3 ships executed a coordinated Hedgehog attack, firing 72 projectiles in overlapping patterns that covered the submarine's probable escape routes. U-645 took 5 direct hits and sank with all hands. The entire engagement lasted 12 minutes from initial detection to final explosion. Most importantly, the convoy continued on course without altering formation. The merchant ships had been protected so effectively that their crews barely knew an attack had occurred. This was the kind of seamless anti-submarine defense that earlier convoy escorts had never achieved. German submarine commanders began reporting psychological stress among their crews. The constant threat of destroyer escort attack was wearing down morale. Submarines that had once surfaced freely to run on diesel engines were now confined underwater for days at a time. Air quality deteriorated as carbon dioxide levels rose. Navigation became guesswork when submarines couldn't surface to take star sights. Battery failures stranded boats underwater with no means of escape. Kapitän zur See Hans Rudolf Rösing, commanding the 11th U-boat flotilla, filed detailed reports describing the changed tactical situation. American destroyer Escorts, he wrote, had transformed convoy escort from reactive defense to proactive hunting. The escorts were no longer content to wait for submarines to attack. They aggressively searched for U-boats, forcing them to remain submerged and limiting their effectiveness. Production statistics told the story of American industrial might applied to anti-submarine warfare. By December 1943, American shipyards had commissioned 120 destroyer escorts, with another 200 under construction. Construction time had dropped to an average of 3.5 months per ship. The Consolidated Steel Corporation's Orange Shipyard in Texas was launching one destroyer escort every 10 days. Each ship cost approximately $6 million compared to $12 million for a fleet destroyer, allowing the Navy to deploy twice as many escorts for the same budget. The simplified design required fewer skilled workers, enabling rapid expansion of the shipbuilding workforce. Standardized components meant that spare parts could be manufactured by multiple suppliers, reducing logistics complexity. The destroyer escorts incorporated lessons learned from early combat experiences. Radar equipment was upgraded to provide better surface detection. Hedgehog mortars were modified for faster reload times. Communication equipment was improved to coordinate attacks between multiple ships. Each ship benefited from innovations developed through actual combat rather than theoretical planning. Training programs evolved to match the operational demands of anti-submarine warfare. The Fleet Sonar School at Key West developed intensive courses that condensed months of training into weeks. Prospective sonar operators practiced on captured German submarines, learning to identify the acoustic signature of different U-boat types. Gunnery training emphasized rapid engagement of surfaced submarines rather than long-range surface combat. Destroyer escort crews were younger and less experienced than fleet destroyer personnel, but they compensated through intensive specialized training. Many officers were Naval Reserve graduates with engineering or technical backgrounds that made them particularly effective at operating complex detection equipment. Enlisted men came from industrial jobs where they'd learned to maintain and repair sophisticated machinery. The impact on German submarine operations was devastating and measurable. In January 1944, Dönitz commanded only 68 operational U-boats in the Atlantic, down from 116 in May 1943. New submarine construction barely replaced losses. Experienced commanders were dead or captured. Replacement crews lacked the training and confidence that had made earlier U-boat operations so successful. German attempts to counter destroyer escort tactics proved largely ineffective. The Type XXI submarine, designed to operate primarily underwater using advanced battery technology, entered production too late to affect the war's outcome. Only 4 Type XXI boats made operational patrols before Germany surrendered, and none encountered American destroyer escorts in combat. Acoustic torpedoes designed to home on escort ship propeller noise achieved limited success. Destroyer escorts began towing noisemakers that decoyed acoustic torpedoes away from their targets. The Foxer gear, consisting of metal pipes that created louder noise than ship propellers, rendered acoustic torpedoes nearly useless within months of their introduction. By spring 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won through the systematic application of mass-produced destroyer escorts. German U-boats were reduced to coastal operations in European waters, where they faced even heavier concentrations of Allied anti-submarine forces. The convoy battles that had terrorized merchant seamen were over. Transatlantic shipping moved with near-complete safety under destroyer escort protection. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944 demonstrated the complete transformation of Atlantic warfare. Over 2 million American soldiers crossed the Atlantic in convoys protected by destroyer escorts, with negligible losses to submarine attack. The massive logistics build-up that made D-Day possible had been secured by these mass-produced warships that German commanders had initially dismissed as ineffective toys. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed the true scope of destroyer escort success. These ships participated in the sinking of 83 German submarines and 31 Japanese submarines during World War II. They escorted thousands of convoys across hostile waters. They rescued countless merchant seamen from sinking ships. Most importantly, they closed the Atlantic to effective German submarine operations, ensuring that American war materials reached Britain and the Soviet Union. The cost in human lives was significant but proportionally lower than expected. 31 destroyer escorts were lost to enemy action during the war, with approximately 1,500 crew members killed. This loss rate of 5.5% compared favorably to the 13% loss rate for merchant shipping in unescorted convoys. The destroyer escorts had protected themselves while saving thousands of merchant seamen. Individual acts of heroism were commonplace among destroyer escort crews. USS Samuel B. Roberts earned the nickname Destroyer Escort that fought like a battleship during the Battle off Samar in October 1944, when she charged Japanese heavy cruisers to protect escort carriers. USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944, establishing a record for anti-submarine warfare that was never exceeded. The technological innovations pioneered on destroyer escorts influenced naval design for decades. Variable depth sonar, developed for these ships, remained standard equipment on anti-submarine vessels into the Cold War era. The Combat Information Center concept, refined through destroyer escort operations, became essential for modern naval warfare. Hedgehog and later Squid anti-submarine mortars evolved into modern anti-submarine rocket systems. Mass production techniques used for destroyer escorts were applied to other naval construction programs. Liberty ships, LSTs, and escort carriers all benefited from lessons learned during destroyer escort construction. The industrial methods pioneered by Henry Kaiser and other civilian contractors transformed American shipbuilding from a craft industry to a mass production enterprise. Post-war analysis revealed that destroyer escorts had been instrumental in winning the Battle of the Atlantic through sheer numbers rather than individual superiority. German U-boats never developed effective counters to coordinated escort attacks. The mathematics of attrition that had initially favored submarines was reversed through industrial production that overwhelmed German capabilities. The psychological transformation was equally important. German submarine crews who had once terrorized Allied shipping found themselves constantly hunted by persistent American escorts. The hunters became the hunted, forced to operate under conditions that made effective attack nearly impossible. Morale collapsed as experienced commanders were lost and replacement crews lacked confidence. Admiral Dönitz acknowledged after the war that American destroyer escorts had been decisive in defeating his submarine offensive. In his memoirs, he wrote that the appearance of these mass-produced escorts in overwhelming numbers had forced a complete reconsideration of German naval strategy. The traditional U-boat tactics developed during the early war years became obsolete when faced with coordinated escort groups. The destroyer escort program vindicated President Roosevelt's strategic vision of quantity over quality in naval construction. Professional naval officers who had initially opposed the program eventually embraced it as escorts proved their combat effectiveness. The Navy's post-war construction plans incorporated lessons learned from destroyer escort operations, emphasizing simplified designs suitable for rapid production. 560 destroyer escorts were commissioned in the United States Navy during World War II, representing the largest single class of warships ever built. Their construction employed over 200,000 workers in shipyards across the country, including tens of thousands of women who entered industrial work for the first time. The social transformation was as significant as the military impact. By the war's end, American destroyer escorts patrolled every ocean where German or Japanese submarines operated. They had evolved from emergency expedients to essential fleet units. Their success demonstrated that innovative design combined with mass production could overcome qualitative superiority through overwhelming numbers. The cheap toys that German U-boat commanders had mocked had systematically destroyed the submarine threat that had nearly won the war for Germany. The final accounting showed that American destroyer escorts had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from a German advantage to an Allied Victory. Where once German U-boats had sunk merchant ships faster than they could be replaced, destroyer escorts now sank U-boats faster than German yards could build them. The mathematical equation had been completely reversed through American industrial power applied to naval warfare. In the end, the story of destroyer escorts proved that wars are won not just by courage or individual skill, but by nations that can build adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities. The ships that professional naval officers had initially dismissed as inferior demonstrated that sometimes good enough, in sufficient numbers, beats perfect in limited quantities. The 560 destroyer escorts that ended the Wolfpacks had been exactly what America needed when it needed them most. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.